Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely legendary historical collision. We are going to see how the isolated island nation of Japan somehow managed to completely shatter the undefeated streak of the Mongol Empire. Now, we all know the Mongols, right? They were an absolute juggernaut, just crushing kingdoms in every direction under hoof and arrow. But what actually happens when that allegedly unstoppable force meets a truly immovable object? Well, let's jump right in and find out.
Marco Polo once famously wrote that the people of Japan had measureless quantities of gold, claiming their palace floors were paved in gold 2 fingers thick. Now, these wildly exaggerated rumors, fueled by older Chinese trade tales, really caught the attention of Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan and the ruler of the Mongol Empire. Japan had historically kept to itself, with zero official diplomatic relations with China or Korea. But legends painted Japan, or Zepangu, as a land literally dripping in gold. In reality, it was more of a silver-rich land, but this glittering myth, mixed with the Mongol belief that heaven had decreed the entire world to be their domain, put a massive target right on Japan's back. So you can see the tension start to build up. In 1266, Kublai Khan sends envoys to Japan with a letter demanding friendly relations. But to the Japanese, the language was incredibly insulting. It called their emperor a mere king, and it was basically a thinly veiled threat of war if Japan didn't immediately bow down as a tributary vassal state. At the time, the real power in Japan was held by the Kamakura shogunate, which was this military dictatorship led by the Hojo clan. And their response? Absolutely nothing. Complete silence. They sent the envoys back empty-handed. When the Khan tried sending more envoys between 1269 and 1272, the Japanese boldly refused to even let them set foot on their shores. That silence was seen as unforgivable by the Khan, setting the stage for a brutal clash of two worlds. You really have to understand the absolute culture shock here. On one side, the Mongols fought as this highly disciplined, oiled machine. They used drums and gongs to coordinate complex maneuvers, unleashed terrifying mass volleys of arrows, and brought horrifying explosive paper and iron bombs. But the samurai? They were entirely decentralized. I mean, they literally fired a single whistling arrow into the air, hoping to start a polite, one-on-one honor duel. Wrapped in heavy, flexible Yoroi armor, their whole concept of war was centered around individual glory. They had absolutely no idea what was about to hit them. And that brings us to the first storm, in 1274. In November of 1274, the Khan unleashed an expeditionary force of roughly 30,000 men, all packed into hundreds of Korean and Chinese vessels. They launched a massive, two-pronged assault, crashing first onto the small, sparsely defended islands of Tsushima and Iki. And the island defenders were just vastly outnumbered. Just imagine this. On Tsushima, a mere 80 mounted samurai charged a beachhead of thousands of Mongols, fighting to the very last man. The Mongols shattered the castle gates, slaughtered the inhabitants, and actually left with prisoners nailed to the prows of their ships. So after devastating those outer islands, the Mongol armada arrives at mainland Japan, landing right at Hakata Bay. The samurai were waiting, but man, it was a jarring clash of styles. When a Japanese warrior fired his traditional whistling arrow to politely open combat, the Mongols reportedly just laughed at him. Instead of pairing off for duels, the Mongols advanced in dense groups behind shields, chucking those explosive bombs. The deafening blast of the bombs, combined with the rhythmic pounding of Mongol war drums, drove the samurai's horses absolutely crazy with panic. But even fighting an uphill battle from the beaches, the Japanese defenders fought fiercely, using their razor-sharp swords and devastating longbows to keep the Mongols pinned near the shoreline. Now, despite inflicting heavy casualties and burning the nearby town of Hakata, the Mongol advance actually stalled out. A senior Mongol commander got shot right in the face with an arrow by a samurai, which incapacitated their leadership. Running low on arrows and bombs, and not wanting to risk holding hostile ground overnight, the Mongols ordered a withdrawal back to their ships. But as they retreated, a fierce storm, what Japanese sources called a reverse wind, swept through the bay. The rough waters severely battered the fleet, forcing the surviving invaders into a total retreat. Japan had survived its first massive test. But neither side saw this as the end. Welcome to the 7-year intermission. The Japanese knew a much bigger storm was coming, and they certainly didn't sit around waiting. First off, when Kublai Khan sent new envoys in 1275 and 1279, Japan didn't just ignore them this time. Nope, they marched them right down to the beaches and executed them, sending an incredibly loud, bloody message of defiance.
Second, they pulled off an absolute marvel of engineering, building a massive 20-kilometer defensive stone seawall right along the shores of Hakata Bay to block any future cavalry landings. And third, they kicked off a huge recruitment drive, rallying samurai from all over the provinces for the inevitable rematch.
Meanwhile, over on the mainland, a geopolitical earthquake happens. In 1279, Kublai Khan finally completes his long, bloody conquest of the Chinese Song dynasty. And this is absolutely crucial. It meant he now had practically limitless resources. He had the immense wealth, the massive shipyards, and the vast manpower of southern China entirely at his fingertips. He was ready to unleash absolute hell upon the defiant Japanese who dared to execute his messengers. Which sets the stage perfectly for the Kamikaze of 1281. Get this, 4,400 ships. The Khan assembled a staggering armada. To really put the sheer scale of this into perspective, this was the largest seaborne invasion in all of human history right up until the Allied Normandy landings in 1944. It was a mammoth undertaking explicitly designed to completely and utterly wipe the island nation off the map. To pull this off, the Khan organized a two-pronged attack. First, you have a northern fleet departing from Korea, packed with roughly 40,000 battle-hardened Mongol, Korean, and northern Chinese soldiers. Their job was to rendezvous with a colossal southern fleet sailing out of southern China, carrying an estimated 60,000 newly conquered Song Chinese troops. Together, we are talking well over 100,000 men sailing across the ocean to crush Japan. But things went sideways for the Mongols almost immediately. The northern fleet arrived early off the coast of Hakata Bay in June, and when they looked toward the beaches, they saw that massive 20-kilometer stone seawall. The Japanese samurai were securely dug in behind it. Every single time the Mongol landing craft tried to approach the shore, they were just shredded by devastating volleys of arrows from the protected defenders. Unable to establish a beachhead at all, the massive northern fleet was forced to stall out and wait offshore for the southern fleet to arrive. And the Japanese didn't just cower behind their wall either. They aggressively took the fight straight to the water. Under the cover of darkness, samurai used small, nimble boats to paddle out to the cramped Mongol fleet. They literally used these tiny boats as makeshift bridges to board the giant vessels. What followed was brutal, close-quarters combat in the dead of night. Samurai crawling out of the darkness to strike while invaders slept, or using fire ships to set the wooden armada ablaze. For the Mongol troops, who were used to fighting on wide-open grassy steppes, being trapped on rocking ships in the pitch black while elite swordsmen silently boarded them, it was absolute psychological warfare. By August, the enormous southern fleet finally arrived, and the two giant armadas linked up. But because of the relentless Japanese resistance, they were still stalled out together in the open water. Then, on August 15th, nature delivered the final, crushing blow. A ferocious typhoon roared through the churning ocean, the Kamikaze, or divine wind. It violently smashed the incredibly dense Mongol fleets against each other and against the rocky shores. The howling wind and surging waves literally tore the largest armada in history to pieces. Let's look at the devastating cost of this defeat. The casualty numbers here are just mind-blowing. The sturdier, Korean-built ships of the Northern Fleet managed to weather the storm slightly better, but they still lost roughly a third of their men to the depths. But that Southern Fleet? They were riding in repurposed, flat-bottom riverboats that were never meant to withstand an ocean typhoon. They suffered a staggering 60 to 90% loss. Tens of thousands of men drowned in a matter of hours. And as for the terrified soldiers who miraculously managed to cling to wreckage and wash ashore alive, they found absolutely no mercy waiting for them. The surviving Mongol commanders actually cut their anchors and fled, completely abandoning their men. The Japanese samurai carefully patrolled the shorelines, systematically hunting down the exhausted survivors. They were either killed on the beaches or marched off into slavery. The invasion force was utterly annihilated. This monumental defeat was really the beginning of the end for Kublai Khan. That legendary aura of Mongol invincibility, built over decades of ruthless conquest, permanently shattered. The economic blow was devastating too, especially for Korea, which had been squeezed entirely dry to build the fleets. The Khan himself was furious, eventually withdrawing from governance, battling severe depression and poor health. He launched a few more disastrous campaigns into Southeast Asia, and slowly, the once unified Mongol Empire began to fatally fracture. But for Japan, surviving this existential threat changed their cultural DNA forever. It sparked an incredibly intense era of national pride. A lasting mythos and divinity cult arose around the Kamikaze, the divine wind. The Japanese firmly believed that the gods themselves had intervened to protect their sacred shores from the invaders, and that belief echoed through their history for centuries to come.
So it really leaves us wondering, how did the sheer, stubborn defiance of one isolated warrior culture manage to stall an invincible war machine just long enough for nature to step in and alter human history? It's a brilliant reminder that sometimes sheer defiance can summon a storm. Thanks for joining me on this explainer,